Okay, this is a continuation of my reasons not to agree with Gardner's version of alienation, or PAS, parental alienation syndrome. The points of contention mentioned above are merely the issues that PAS supporters will address, but there are many more points that critics, myself included, have highlighted. I shall point these out in the following. First of all, PAS is not a diagnostic evaluation tool, but rather a list of symptoms. Like any list of symptoms, it is subject to personal interpretation. For example, hostilities towards a parent can be caused by abuse or alienation. The observation of hostilities alone are insufficient grounds to affirm absolute PAS. Secondly, Dr. Gardner's famous quote, "There's a little bit of pedophilia in all of us," doesn't hold water, since he never once in all of his writings gave a truly critical analysis of what exactly constitutes normal sexuality in the first place. Such a claim would have sounded even more absurd if the word pedophilia were replaced with homicidal tendencies. Naively applying an abnormal behavior to a general situation is called the fallacy of generalization in philosophy. An amusing example of this thinking can be observed in the following example. Alcoholics drink alcohol. Therefore, anybody who drinks alcohol is an alcoholic. Thirdly, among Gardner's other unusual ideas about human sexuality was his belief that sexual relations between parents and children is a healthy demonstration of reproductivity in the population. This is disconcerting to me, because I realize that this line of thought could well be used to psychologically excuse a number of behaviors that deviate from a moralistic and constructive norm. This kind of argument could be used to suggest that murder, stealing, prostitution, and selfish dishonesty are all, at their psychologically underlying core, basically normal behaviors. By this line of thinking, any murder that occurs in a populated area could be considered a psychologically normal means of population control. Stealing could be recoined as the proactive distribution of wealth. Prostitution would be redefined as normal sexual expression that encourages baby booms. And finally, selfish dishonesty could be retermed population control / survival of the fittest. I suppose it's of little surprise that children whom corrupt courts and CPS workers, forced to live with their abusers under the guise of Gardner's PAS theory, often end up behaving in ways that are self-destructive and outright unlawful. The heart of Gardner's theory is oppositional to the Constitution, the law, and the development of a society in which everyone gets along so that everyone can live up to his or her optimal potential. Finally, Gardner's writings clearly show that he believed sex with children is a natural behavior and that people shouldn't stop it or criticize it. This reasoning has various major problems with it. Certainly Gardner has a point in arguing we're all animals, since biologically we are. As a consequence, we all have differing degrees of bad impulses. However, this doesn't mean that we all have the same type of impulses, nor does it mean that we must be subject to our bad impulses. We have free will, and we aren't just genetic zombies. If dogs can be trained and we're more complex than dogs, then we should be able to learn and apply much more than dogs ever could. Teaching young children constructive behavior helps set their future behaviors so that adults' good behavior comes easily. If the theory of evolution is correct, then our current behaviors will influence the physical evolution of future generations. Gardner's argument that it's natural, don't stop and don't criticize, is a hollow throwback to absolute savagery as far as I'm concerned. For these reasons, I can't with good conscience support Dr. Richard Gardner's PAS, and am very concerned that many people from the Fathers' Rights movement openly support it and are trying to have it included in the upcoming DSM-5. That's what I wanted to read of my criticisms of Gardner. I'm not saying that alienation does not exist. I'm just saying I do not agree with Gardner's version of it. And Gardner's version Gardner's PAS should not be accepted in court or anywhere else. And I believe if the system were reorganized so that there'd be an A, Commission Against Corruption, that they should be severely punishing people who bring this into court. The reason for having an A, collective combat against corruption panel all across America, the idea behind this is that checks and balances are not enough in the system. I think most people who have endured court abuse will agree that someone coming once a year or once every 6 months to look at the books and see that finances are good and that no corruption has been really exposed is not enough. There needs to be a lot more than that. And there needs to be enforcement. When the Court of Appeals reverses decisions, kids often are not returned to the parents they should be. There's no real consequence except on paper. And what I'm saying this commission should do is actually enforce consequences and investigate cases properly. So if anyone didn't understand my reason for that, that's the reason for it. I wrote this letter to the court when I was a little girl. I couldn't write very well, so somebody wrote down what I said for me. It says, "Please listen to Bethany Farmer. Listen to Bethany Farmer's mom. Don't listen to Bill's lies that he says. Bill lies about nasty things, bad things. He said that he doesn't bring my mom to court. He does bring my mom to court." The reason I knew this is because he yelled about it all the time on our front porch. "Bethany Farmer is very sad because you won't listen to me. Bill lies when he says my mom is keeping me from him, and she's not. He did touch me. Poor Bethany Farmer. Please help poor Bethany." And here's the picture that I drew. This letter was court ignored. Nobody paid any attention to it. Another time, when I was sitting downstairs in front of witnesses, I drew a picture of the man who I said touched me and I didn't like to be touched by. I talked about the sexual abuse, and I turned to Bill and I started asking him for physical descriptions and started drawing a picture of his physical description. What color are your eyes? What color is your hair? Etc., etc. Here's the black and white picture of what I drew. More proof that I was not coerced into saying things, that this was spontaneous and it was coming from me. Finally, here's a poem that I wrote, a prose, describing the sexual abuse that I endured and how I felt. It's called Control, Hate. I waddle around in trusting innocence, so small, so helpless to the awful danger beside me. I cannot understand you, my badly wanted friend. You love the dark, you hate my joy, you dress in clothes that express engulfing distance from the world, and for a moment I look up and see a drug addict before me. You speak in a happy voice, and get not, I speak to you in a happy voice, and get naught but a dark slurred mutter in reply. They tell me you love me, and we are of one nest, but we are separate magnets that push each other away. You grin at me while baring teeth like sharp knives, most unpleasant. In fearful curiosity, I look into your eyes. They look at me fixedly with strange, disquieting alertness. A part of my inner soul shivers. The room is cold. I go on babbling and toddling. It couldn't have meant anything. You're always so distant. Suddenly, as I walk by, your arms become long snakes. They encircle me and grab me tightly and force me close to you. And here I am, shocked by the unpredictability of your shocking, speedy fangs. I'm a rag doll to the shock as you force me on your lap. My mind scarcely registers the physical world as I wonder what you're doing, why you do it, and if its meaning is good. I look down and see your hands petting me in slow, rhythmic motions. My inaudible breath is quick, a sort of gasping. The shock is frightening, confusing. My clothes are grimy and hot, and I want my mother. I squirm. I try to leave, but your hands and arms restrain me, like metal. They are rough and dangerous. You finally let me go, but not out of consideration. I stagger away, turn around, and look at you. A strange, defiant smile on your face. Your dark, beady-like eyes have changed again. What does it mean? They come down later to turn on the lights, but my soul is dark and despondent. You were rough with me. I wander away. You leave. You come again. It seems the millionth time. Why won't you go away like before? Just leave me alone. I hate what you do to me. It's worse every time. I hate how rough you are. I beg and plead with those I love, but it's no use. They try to listen, but you deafen them with angry screams and snarls. You frighten them. They set me down again at your will. Let me go, is what I say, although my voice is gone. I struggle. You tighten. I hate your touch. I'm no longer the wandering babbler. I'm a frightened creature. You let me go. I race upstairs. My mom is there. I get on her lap and curl up a small invisible thing. I hide. You come upstairs. You bring the darkness with you. You holler in joyful glee. I curl up tighter as you come. By impulse now, I'm sent to hell. You're back again. Or so I think. You might have never left. I look up and see those eyes. You scare me. I'm cruelly shoved against flowers. Your hands are fire that spreads, sparing nothing of me. Stop it, stop it. I cry, but you tell me to relax and tell me terrible stories. I see your hands on course to attack. Helpless, I look away at the floor. In death, I remember no more. That is how it felt to be sexually abused by Bill. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm sorry, I lost my composure. I try very hard to contain it. I'm very sorry if I have troubles containing myself. I try very hard. I will try my best to go on. I'll try to talk about Bill's behaviors towards me and why I didn't like to be around him. Sorry if this takes me a moment. Okay. Okay. 1988. I was 1 year old. Bill rarely came during the year. June 1988. I know for a fact that he stole my mother's truck. He spent 2 visits circling the truck rather than interact with me. Later he drove it rather than Mom. Now I should stress that when he did this, he would run around the truck and he'd try the key on the side that was away from the window so nobody could see what he was doing. He was not interacting with me. He was not playing with me. He was just trying to see if his key would fit the truck so he could steal it. It was premeditated. July 1988. Bill, on one of his visits, informed me that he was God the Father while listening to some of my religious tapes. He refused to let me sing the God lines on the tape because he said those were his lines because that's who he is. This happened in the front seat of the truck that he stole. And he turned up the volume when I tried to sing and started shouting at me as loudly as he could. 17 months old. He had no concern for my health whatsoever. As I may have put already, I came back from visits with him with burns on me. Some of the burns declared to be cigarette burns by doctors. I had a vaginal infection. My vaginal opening was widened. I had dirty diapers. Really, really disgusting. Burns everywhere. Dehydrated, wet, soaking wet. The whole thing was not good. Okay. 1989. I was 2 years old. Bill rarely came during the year. In the summer and December 1989, he refused the only gifts I'd ever made him, which really hurt my feelings because I hoped that I would have a father who would love me like everyone else and would accept gifts when I made them for him, and he did not. Also, during the same year, there was an episode with an ash bucket from downstairs, the stove downstairs. Bill put the ash bucket, I remember this because of my photographic memory, he placed it down on the floor in front of me, and because of my age, I was curious, and he knew I'd play in it. And it was pretty obviously intentionally to get me curious about it, so I'd make a mess across the floor to irritate my grandparents and my mother. Very immature behavior, not good for me to be playing in ashes. Not to mention that some of the ashes could have been hot. They weren't, to my recollection, but it could have been. Okay, 3 years old. I have a leg cave pertes, which is a problem with my bone, and my blood can clot as a result of this. Actually, because it's complicated, I have to go into the medical history of it. But my hips, because of the problem, it hurt when I was held in certain positions. So when Bill would try to lift me up in front of people, he would do this for a reason I'll discuss in a minute. He would always hold me in the position that hurt me the most. And no matter how many times we told him to stop, and I told him to stop, he would not. The reason he was lifting me up is we had ceiling panels, like in hospitals, that can be pushed and moved. And he liked to irritate everybody by telling me to push on the ceiling panels and make them totally out of order. And it was just for the pure purpose of irritating, nothing more. He tried to turn it into a game in which I was encouraged to push as many panels as possible. I got tired of it, and I stopped wanting to do this, so he tried to turn the game into a game of, I would be called a sack of potatoes and encouraged to push on the ceiling panels. When that got boring, he started doing a game where he would flip me, and I enjoyed the sensation of flipping, but he started trying to do it so that I wouldn't be flipped, and I only had to get in his arms and push the panels for him. And I didn't want to do it without being flipped, and so I stopped, doing anything. I wouldn't push the panels until he flipped me, because I liked the sensation of moving and flipping and turning. So that showed that he was not playing with me. He was just using me as a tool to get some kind of strange revenge on my grandparents and my mother. During that year, 3 years old, I hit my head on a table corner. I still have the scar, right about here. He was supposed to be watching me. He was not concerned, not paying attention to me, didn't care. I walked right into the table, started crying. He got mad because he hears me crying instead. Very rude, didn't care. There was an episode that year where I was told I had a toy clown, a porcelain clown, or I think it was porcelain, I'm not sure. And this was one of my personal toys. And Bill told me while we were downstairs to go and turn around and go into the piano room so that I couldn't see him. And when I came back and was called back, my clown was broken on the floor. And he told me that my grandfather, who was upstairs, had stepped on the clown to break it to hurt me. And I went upstairs and I asked my grandfather why he broke my clown, and he said he didn't. And the only thing I conclude now from this is that Bill was trying to get me to blame other family members and upset everybody. Also hoped that I would cry and lose my temper. Well, that wasn't as bad as what he did later. I was given a paper crown that I had on a special trip to like an amusement park thing. I don't even know how to describe it. Anyway, I was given a princess crown. I think you're familiar with those paper crowns that they have for little girls. And I brought it home, and I was very proud of it because I could pretend that I was a princess and feel like I was a princess with this crown. I was very young at the time, and my grandfather had observed what happened with this, and he knew that Bill must have done it. What Bill did was He took my crown and he ripped it in half in front of me and threw it down at me and said, "There, you're not a princess anymore." That's what he said to me, and I was very, very hurt and crying because of that. And my grandfather concluded that it must have been Bill who did it and not me, because the tear was too clean, and only an adult's fingers, which were experienced at ripping paper like that, would be able to do such a clean cut. So that was something that he did just to upset me. I would consider that emotional abuse. 3 years old, he came and sexually abused me when I was alone during visits at my grandparents' house. He called me ugly in front of a room full of witnesses. Strangely enough, he insisted that my stuffed unicorn was beautiful when I insisted on it being ugly. I was calling everything ugly after I was called ugly. I also cut my hair to solve the problem. After I cut my hair, he called me ugly again, also in front of witnesses. I couldn't look in a mirror after this, and I've had troubles looking in mirrors after this ever since then, and I've had troubles with my self-image as a result of this. I've had a lot of troubles. He spent visits at the Forest Fair Mall telling Joyce, the supervisor this year, when I was 3 years old, nasty lies about my mom rather than interact with me. I was there the whole time, and he spent most of the time trying to convince her that I wasn't allowed to visit. Pretty strange. Bill and Joyce, the supervisor, refused me the right to leave the mall and go home. Now, Joyce did it not to hurt me, but because she felt that I should try to make things work between Bill and me, that I should try to stay. Bill did it as a means of control. When I became scared because I wasn't allowed to go home, I tried to get away from Bill. So I ran around. I tried to get under the table that we were sitting at Forest Fair Mall, and Bill started going around the chairs, running around the chairs, trying to drag me out from under the table in order to force me to sit up straight in my chair. And Joyce yelled at him and said to stop it. She did not approve of this. She said it was wrong, that there are other ways of talking to the child and dealing with situations rather than getting physical. So that was his behavior towards me at 3 years old that I remember. At 4 years old, he came and continued sexually abusing me when I was alone during visits at my grandparents' house. He spent more visits at Forest Fair Mall telling Joyce, the supervisor, nasty lies about my mom rather than interact with me. He called the police over and over again to my grandparents' home in order to harass me. Bill made sure I saw him talking to them through the front window. This was intentional. The threat was that if I told on him about the sexual abuse, that my mom would go to prison if I did. This really scared me, and my mom and my grandparents remembered. My mom still remembers. I ran from door to door when the police came to our house, trying to lock them out, screaming, "Don't take my mommy away and put her in prison." I was very scared and crying and really traumatized. June 1991, still 4 years old. I remember feeling somewhat scared when Bill physically blocked my mom's car, refusing to physically move so she could leave the parking lot outside the psychologist's. That really scared me. I didn't think it was normal. It seemed psychotic, and I thought he wanted to hurt my mom. July 1991. He picked Lynn, his girlfriend, up at the Bailey's driveway next door to my grandparents' home, and then dropped her off there when visits finished. Now, these are big farm areas, so you couldn't see the end of the driveway. So he could hide her there, and he was really weird about hiding her there, and I think the reason he did it was to scare me. I'll try to explain that in a minute. Dropped her off there when visits finished. I asked him if he lived next door, and he wouldn't give me a yes or no answer, but instead played games with tenses. Example, I have been living here, I have lived here, etc., etc., etc. In fall of 1991, same year, Bill volunteered information about a break-in at his house and told me that he had a gun. This made me crazy with fear, since I figured that if he lived next door or so much as visited the area, he could then shoot my mom with his gun. I think trying to hide Lynn next door was to convince me that he lived there and that he could come over and shoot my mom anytime he wanted. Okay, at 5 years old, 1992, he called the police over and over again to my grandparents' home in order to harass me. Bill made sure I saw him talking to them through the front window, as usual. The threat was that if I told about sexual abuse, my mom would go to prison. Bill wouldn't speak to me in April 1992 for days as revenge for the fact that I wouldn't call him Daddy. In July 1992, this ended in July 1992, picked Lynn, his girlfriend, up at the Bailey's driveway, trying to hide her, refused to give yes/no answers about living next door, played games with tenses. I have been living here, I have lived here, etc. Continues that one. Ended in August 1992, spent visits at the mall, continually telling Joyce, the supervisor, nasty lies about my mom rather than interact with me. In August 1992, Bill terrified me by screaming on my grandparents' porch and in their house. He screamed that he'd take my mom to court, that she'd go to jail, that he'd have my grandparents' house taken away from them, would proceed to kick them out on the street as homeless beggars, that he'd live in their house, and that I would live with him whether I liked it or not. In August of 1992, Bill stuck his finger in my mouth without permission or explanation. It seemed like he enjoyed keeping his finger in my mouth for a long time, swishing it around over and over again. I can't prove this, but I certainly suspect what he could have been preparing me for. Anyone who has any experience in oral sex might have an idea of what I'm talking about. I don't know if that's for sure what he was doing. He tried to say there was a tooth loose in my mouth or some stupid story like that. He had his finger in my mouth and was playing around in there way longer than he should have been, and it was not for searching for a tooth. I'm sorry. No, that was not what that was about. So that I felt was important to note that scared me and upset me and confused me. In September 1992, Bill frightened me to the point of wetting myself when I was on top of a slide. Although I don't remember exactly what was said, I know it had to do with the fact that he knew that I had told someone about sexual abuse. October 31st, 1992, Bill frightened me to the point of wetting myself when I was on top of another slide. Basically, what was said was that I would be sorry for having told someone about the sexual abuse. October 1992, Bill refused all food I'd offer him on visits, even when I unpeeled bananas in front of him, ate half, and then offered him the other half. October 31st, 1992, when Sierra, his new wife's granddaughter, was born, I was treated as if I'd contaminate her or something. I wasn't allowed to hold her, touch her hand, or so much as see the child. Bill and Lynn formed a tight circle around her, which I could not penetrate, and held her high where I couldn't see her. They then proceeded to hand me her dirty diapers to throw away. Although I wasn't asked how I felt about this, nor did I ever ask to throw dirty diapers away. November 1992. While at a restaurant, I believe it was Perkins, Bill tried to manipulate me into repeating and into telling my mom that she was cruel and that she wouldn't let me visit with him. December 1992. Bill tried to drag me out from underneath a table when I was hiding under it to get away from him. Bill nearly hit my mother while he was having a screaming fit in my grandparents' house, but dropped his hand when the supervisor, Terry Kessinger, jumped out of her chair. December 1992. He bribed me with toys in order to make me visit with him, and he drove down the driveway with presents in the trunk of his car when I didn't want to visit one time. Left me there crying and screaming, "There go my Christmas presents." I think that's emotionally abusive. December 1992. Bill said in front of me that he wouldn't pay a penny to see me. So that's how much he values me. Very disconcerting. Also during this year, and when I was 5 years old in 1992, he ignored me completely and was very dismissive about my new and first bicycle. I was very excited to have it, and Patty Steele, a woman from our church, witnessed this and felt that he was emotionally abusive in his treatment of me and his refusal